Fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. We got Mr. Joe Goldberg in the house.
I'm in the house. I'm ready to talk.
Yeah,
I need to learn a new topic here because Jerry's going to be interesting for me. I'm normally boring and just an espionage guy.
Yeah, but you've always wanted to be like a gangster, haven't you?
I am a gangster. Who as a child didn't run around with a fake Tommy gun saying I'm Al Capone or something like that?
I didn't.
Yeah, I didn't either.
So there you go.
I was a cowboy too and a warrior.
No, I didn't want to do any of that stuff. No.
Well, sorry.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just a little bit more violent than the rest of you.
Yeah. Well, I guess so. Well, I wouldn't say that, but, that's what happens.
Maybe it's imagination.
Yeah, it could be.
But you became a crime writer and I became an espionage guy. Fiction,
yeah. I wanted to talk about, death, murder, interview murders, stuff like that. Yeah. That's why we've got Jerry Langton here today.
Absolutely.
I'm not a murderer.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's why they always say that, when they're in prison.
Everybody who said that who is in prison is not a murderer or not guilty. You're guilty, Jerry, guilty.
Yeah, they say they didn't do it. So listen, Jerry has been writing a new story, and of course it's called How It's Done, and it's the true story of how one man took down organized crime to save his family. So Jerry Langton, let's welcome you and talk to you about this book.
Well, thanks for having me, Alan.
Well, it's a pleasure. So what's going on with this book? So this is a true story, and you've met the person that lived the story, so to speak.
Yeah.
So let's talk about him first, and who is this guy that you wrote the story about?
Well, he's a very interesting guy. He was born in Newfoundland, and as is commonplace with people from there, his family moved to Ontario, looking for a better life. Things didn't really work out very well for Dave. Even though he was a bright kid, he constantly got in trouble, which made him very popular with the other kids, but not the adults. And by the time he was 14, he was out on the street, homeless, out of school, kind of pointless, but he had a lot of friends. And one of the things that the friends all liked was to get high. So he thought, you know what, I'll supply them with drugs, which will pay for my drugs, and also, pay for me to sleep and eat. And he got very successful, and he got so successful selling crack in his early 20s that he had to look for places in his backyard where he could bury bags of $100,000 in cash because he just had no place to put it, and where the cops wouldn't find it. So he was unbelievably successful, just taking in tons of money. But then he and some friends did an armed robbery on a lark. They saw, $1 million worth of jewelry and decided, we want that. But unfortunately, they robbed another gangster and got caught. And he went to prison. And while he was in prison, his girlfriend had his son. And he vowed then and there that, you know what, I don't care how lucrative this is, that's no way to bring up a kid. So he changed sides, became a police agent, simply to give his son a better life, which is kind of admirable when you think about it.
But now, so he is Canadian, right? And so when he got out of prison, where did he go?
He went to a halfway house. He first went to a halfway house in sort of the western part of downtown Toronto, which was really, really, really rough and violent. And but due to his good behavior and keeping a job and just being a relatively model prisoner, he got moved to an almost luxurious halfway house in Mississauga, which is just to the west of Toronto, and got a job and an apartment and took care of himself.
When Dave went from a life of crime and had his epiphany in prison, how did he change his ways? How did he himself as a person change it personality-wise? I mean, you're burying $100,000 in cash and you've been caught, and now suddenly you're working the good side, So how did he change? And how did you capture that in the book?
Well, it was pretty easy to capture because he didn't even have that much to do with it. What happened was when he got out of the halfway house, despite the fact that he had a job that paid well and his employers were so impressed with him they gave him a free apartment, he just went back to selling drugs as though nothing had happened. But he started to solicit the police to work for them as an agent while his network was still going. And they were reluctant at first, but once they agreed, they were in charge of what happened next. He didn't really have a choice. They said, "You're not selling any more drugs from now on." They gave him a cover story so people would not realize that he had turned. The cover story was that the cops were leaning on him so heavily that he didn't want to get his hands dirty with the work and had other people do it for him. And after that, all he had to do was behave like he normally would and record it all. And to his credit, he was an amazing actor and really fearless. He was in situations where, guns were pointed at him and he still felt calm. He still did what he had to do.
How did he achieve becoming president of the bikers in his area?
That's kind of a funny story because, now, I've been writing about bikers for around 20 years and, the landscape changes. And right now the Hells Angels are so dominant that the Outlaws and other clubs are afterthoughts, the Rock Machine being at the very bottom. So when the Rock Machine got in contact with him and saw how financially successful he was, they didn't ask any questions. They didn't put him through any sort of screening. They just said, "Okay, you're our guy." And Dave said, "What about my crew?" And he said, "Well, they're your chapter and you're the president." And it actually surprised him that they were that desperate, but they clearly needed someone who was making money.
So during his time as a biker and being the president of his chapter and doing all that stuff, what crimes did he tell you that he was involved with?
The usual. He was still selling cocaine, crack, and heroin. Heroin being particularly profitable in southern Ontario. And, trafficking in stolen goods, trafficking in firearms. For example, he had a barn on his farm, and he used it for a lot of things, but primarily he let a lot of the sort of crack-addicted people that were his customers live in the barn because the farm wasn't close to the city and, the commute was tough for a drug user. One of them offered him 100 lawnmowers. And he was like, what the hell am I going to do with 100 lawnmowers? But then the president of the Rock Machine said, "Can I have one of those lawnmowers?" And so he got into the lawnmower business.
So, Jerry, I got to ask a question here. What do you want the reader to get out of this book when they read it? Entertained about this interesting guy? Or was there anything else besides being entertained about this interesting guy?
Oh, of course. The fact that he's entertaining makes it sort of a page-turning book and a lot of fun. But what I really wanted to do with this is, it's part of a sort of a bigger thesis with all of my books, is I really want to help shake loose the naivety a lot of people, especially Canadians, have about crime, that they don't realize it's around them, that that's somewhere far away. It doesn't affect me. It actually affects you all the time. I mean, if organized crime is, as you certainly were in my hometown and in Montreal, involved in construction, the building you're in might not be that safe. There was one time the mafia in my hometown, Hamilton, Ontario, got a contract to supply food for a major venue. But all the food they supplied was past its expiration date. So they didn't care how many people got sick. They made a buck. They saved money by giving them bad food. And that's kind of how it works. So Dave could walk into, your living room, if invited, and be welcome, and you would think he was just a regular guy. But in fact, he's, selling rocket launchers. He's, supplying heroin to the neighborhood. And, you don't see it. He's literally the boy next door. And I want people to understand that, that is how organized crime works.
Did he have a moral code that said, I'll do everything but this?
You know what? He did have a moral code, but it generally didn't involve crime. There was, no real thought about the damages of the crime he did. It's like, he was dealing crack, which, is terrible in and of its own. But, he had to get into heroin, he felt, because he was losing customers, who wanted heroin. And, heroin is, does terrible, terrible, tragic things to people and the community, but there was no guilt in it. It was just, this is a product people want, I'm supplying it. His moral code, however, did apply to things like children. He didn't have a great childhood, so, he hated seeing other children suffer. So, if someone brought a child to the crack house, the trap house as he calls it, they were sent home. We don't want kids involved. So he would also, and a lot of people in organized crime do this, he also became something of a community leader. If someone needed something, he'd pay for it. If something, if a problem in the neighborhood needed adjudication, he would listen to both sides and, give advice. So he brought a morality along, but as far as his actual crimes, he was just like anyone else.
So what led him, why did he go undercover? What was the main reason? Was it what he thought it was going to be? And was it going to get him out the way he wanted? Yeah,
well, that's the thing. He got into the drug trade essentially for survival. He, like I say, he was homeless at 14. He had to do something. But he had proven to himself through the halfway houses, experience that he could work and he could succeed and do well, in industries, that were, more above board. But when he was in prison, he had a lot of time to think. He spent a lot of time segregated, because of his behavior. And it really came to him that, there's no way out of the drug game, except for prison, death, or, becoming, a drug-addled client of your own. And so he didn't want that for himself. He didn't want that for his kids, certainly. So he thought, I kind of have to go straight. The easiest way to do it is to become a police agent, because if you're successful at it, they pay you quite a lot of money.
So was he suspected, or did he have problems with anybody catching on to what he was doing during that time?
Not really. One of the interesting sort of side quests in the book is he sold everyone. He had no problem, but he had a veteran undercover cop come along with him on some of the buys. He was posing as, an end of times prepper who wanted as many weapons as possible. And the people who were supplying the weapons to him would often express their doubt about the undercover cop to Dave. They had already decided that Dave was okay. Dave, was absolutely trustworthy. But these other people around him, they weren't so sure. So he was kind of a natural to fall into the undercover world. So did you come across any surprises? Anything that you totally didn't expect to happen when you were going through this story? Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you always think about Canada. And a lot of people, certainly in the United States, think that, there are no firearms up there. But I was shocked at how prevalent they are. One of the reasons there are a lot of shootings in Canada and not that many actual homicides is because the gang members have a preference for automatic handguns, which generally are incredibly inaccurate. So there's a lot of, collateral damage that comes from them, and that surprised me. But more important, what surprised me was the market for things like hand grenades and rocket launchers. He even was able to get his hands on, although he declined, an M250 caliber military machine gun, an incredibly powerful weapon. He said he didn't have much use for it, but I guess he wasn't, taking down crowds of people, but it was sort of mind-blowing to know that those things are on the streets of essentially nice suburbs in Canada. You mean you don't have any rocket launchers at your house? I have a BB gun. But,
okay, same thing.
Yeah.
So I got to ask a question, a couple. Let me start with sort of ancillary to the one that you just talked to about the world of violence that he's in. we hear mafia, you hear cartel, you hear drugs, you hear weapons dealing. How violent really is that world, and the part that he might have gotten involved in also? Now, how violent is Dave?
Dave himself is not violent. I don't know that he has physically harmed anyone in his life. He always had muscle with him, just in case. There's a great deal of violence. It depends on who you're dealing with. There's a great hierarchy of organized crime in Canada, and it starts with the traditional Italian mafia, and of course Russian mafia, Irish mafia, those sorts of groups. Although a lot of those are dying because the children, the would-be recruits, are choosing not to get into organized crime because they often already have decent money, good educations, great prospects ahead of them. So the mafia is kind of slowly dying, the old ethnic mafias that we know. And the bikers are the level below that. Below that are the street gangs. And a lot of the street gangs, they don't really have disciplined leadership. Their members are often quite young, so they can be very violent. Like, for example, in Eastern Ontario near Ottawa, there was an outlaws clubhouse, and they had run afoul of the Montreal street gang. So the Montreal street gang sent two guys out there with AK-47s to, shoot up the place. And the outlaws shot back, and one of them was killed. And it was shocking for many to realize that he was only 14 years old. But that's how the street gangs work. So, they're far more likely to explode into random violence because the organized crime, they have traditions, they have rules, they have an ability to self-sustain and not get caught, whereas a lot of the other criminals are just right off the handle. But he didn't deal with them too often, so he would hear stories about this happening to that person, this happening to that person. But generally, the people that he knew who would, owe money or, look at the wrong guy's girl or something, generally just got beat up, often assault with a weapon, but not life-threatening.
Well, I got a question. I'm sure he gets asked this. You get asked this. All right, so the secret's not a secret anymore. Yeah. All right, he's overt. So what's his life like now that he dealt with all these people he just described, and now he's in a book?
Yeah, well, in some ways, he's happy as a clam. He's got a lot of money. He's got his family around him. He's essentially safe from retribution. But he spent so long in prison or as a criminal. Even though he has a good work ethic, as shown by the jobs he had, he doesn't really have, the spark of ambition or inspiration. So he'll often find himself waking up in the morning, making breakfast for his kids, and then sitting in front of a video game, at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then not leaving that video game until 7 in the afternoon. He's so used to having a life that is regimented by outside forces, be it, prison, the police, gangsters, clients, that now that he's left to his own devices, he often doesn't know what to do.
He's not worried about getting whacked?
Not really. I opened the book by pointing out that the one question everybody asks Dave is that, how does it feel to have, a contract on your head? It's reputed to be about $250,000. And he said, if I worried about that, I couldn't get anything done. He's not worried about retribution. He's in a location where no one from his past life knows him. The internet is being scrubbed of essentially every mention of him, except for the armed robbery. And, his name is different, and he's just living life. And, he trusts his own ability to sense danger. There are many times in the story where Dave would spot an undercover cop, and I'm pretty good at that, but he's a lot better than me. And he also knows who the gangsters are. So he's pretty happy with how it all worked out.
Was that his personal ultimate goal when he decided to go work with the police and then get out? Was that living that life someplace else, a different name?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like the most complicated thought process in the world. He was like, I can change careers in a relatively safe way and be sitting on a pile of money. I want to do this. And, like all of those sorts of goals for everyone, you get what you planned for, but more comes with it. And, his sort of inability to, form a new life yet was really the only bad thing that's happened to him.
Was he who you expected him to be? Like when you started getting to know him and talking to him and all that, from the original time that you were going to take on the story, was it what you thought it was going to be?
Not at all. Not at all. I've dealt with a lot of people in crime, and from all the levels up to founders and national presidents of biker gangs, to regular street hoods, and by and large, I find a lot of them are very economical with the truth. They like very much to make themselves look good no matter what the situation is. It's typical of, an outlaw in Canada to say, I'm an outlaw, I'm a bad dude. You'll say, oh, great. Well, I'm a reporter. I'd like to know exactly which laws you break. And, that's when they say, oh, none of them. Don't worry. I'm not. So, but Dave really struck me as someone who was willing to tell his story, warts and all. If he made a mistake, if he did something embarrassing, he just went with it. And, the truth was the truth to him. And he was also shockingly well-spoken for someone who hadn't been to school after, 8th grade or 9th grade. He had a great handle on wordplay and cultural references. He was just, a smart guy who his circumstances led him to a different path. I mean, if he were, grew up differently, I could see him easily holding an executive position at a major company.
Yeah, they're all criminals anyway. So.
Yeah, exactly.
I worked at Motorola. No, that's not true. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. I'm sure, because this isn't the first one you've written about, as in crime cases and stuff, so I'm sure you go through a lot with each one. How did this particular case change you or affect you?
It modified my view of, how things work at a base level. Oftentimes, when you get too into a subject like organized crime, you begin to have a shorthand. These guys come from here, these guys do this because of this. But Dave did things differently in sort of all ways. But I found that the way that he did things, is becoming more commonplace. The sort of structures of organized crime are breaking down, and people are choosing criminal acts as career choices rather than, being born into it or, being in an economically desperate situation. They'll just think, you know what, I could sell cocaine and make a few bucks on the side. And I see more and more of that all the time. Once I started writing this book, more and more people came, I don't want to say out of the woodwork, but, out of the community, and told me that, or at least let me know that, yeah, many people are just like sort of someone you'd run into on the street, and they have a secret life of, running firearms, running heroin that we don't know about. But, you'll notice that they don't go to work in the morning like you do, and they probably drive a more expensive car than you do.
There you go. See, I've been doing it wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
You got to work harder.
Yeah, that's crazy. So how did you get into this crazy business of writing these kinds of stories? Like what led you down this path?
Well, I started writing professionally when I was 19. I was still in college. I was reviewing film and concerts for my local paper, and I just always stayed in the newspaper business, mostly in Toronto and here in New York City. And then we had some kids, and I didn't want to put my kids in daycare. I wanted to raise them myself. So I stayed home, and I did a lot of freelance writing. And, before a couple of years were out, I had 2 offers to write books. And one was a crime book because it's another like shocking, almost unbelievable story. This is a guy from my hometown, 5'4", didn't speak a word of French, went to Montreal, joined the Hells Angels. None of them spoke a word of English, and before long became their national president and made them the dominant, sort of crime organization in Canada, even to this day, even though that happened like 25 years ago. And it was such a remarkable story that it proved very popular. And so I decided to go with, sort of what I had become good at. And I kept writing about bikers, mafia, cartels. My most recent book, before How It's Done, is about the Trump administration. So I guess, I do know a lot about organized crime.
Yeah. I was going to say, it's right in there. So listen, what do you got going now? Like you're promoting this book and all that stuff. So what's on the back burner?
Yeah, I'm actually writing a book. Was given, the story was given to, and the contacts were given to me by an author I have a great deal of respect for, and it's about a police officer in Texas who spent 20 years behind bars for a killing that he admits he did kill the woman, but the circumstances that led to his arrest and imprisonment were the result, he says, of a major conspiracy and corruption. And the more I know about him and the more I hear his story and I listen to other people, I find that he has a point, and he could have spent 20 years of his life behind bars when he shouldn't have. So it's really something I'm enjoying getting down to.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, listen, where do people find you? And do you like to interact with readers, fans, and all that stuff? Let's give out your website. Let's give out all that.
Yeah, I mean, I get approached at least twice a week with people with book ideas. Most of them aren't very good, but I do follow up on the good ones. I can be reached. My own website is jerrylangton.com. That's Jerry with a J, and Langton is Langton. I also have a company called Bronx Kill, which sounds terrifying, but it's really just a small body of water that, you can find me on as well. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I don't hide.
Well, maybe you should. You never know.
Yeah.
One of these times, you might be wanting to.
Go. Dave's got a spare room in the place. You can go live in there and mow the lawn.
Well, a Hells Angel once did say to me, we don't mind you because you don't make shit up and you don't want to be one of us. And I thought, well, okay, I guess that's fine then.
Yeah. Well, you go with your strength.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Whatever you say,
Yeah,
sir.
exactly.
Whatever you say, sir. Well, we appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you, Alan. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, the book, How It's Done. And this is Jerry Langton. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.